And we're live. It is Thursday, November 21st, 2024, 8 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great fucking day. And you are watching Dog Shirt TV, a fucking revolution in morning television. We didn't have a show yesterday. And, I am sure that somebody showed up as though there was a show and was like, hey guys, where is everybody? But I told you there wasn't going to be a show, and there wasn't going to be a show because I was giving a talk in New York after a super late night at the Russian embassy, and then getting to New York and getting caught in a rainstorm. And, it was one of those nights. But I got a full night of sleep yesterday evening, and, and Nastia is here, which means that this is not just morning coffee. It is coffee and wine because it is afternoon in Kiev. Do you have wine?
I always have wine at our household, but I'm trying to cut back on it. So I might make a cup of coffee, actually.
Dry pre-January?
A little bit, yeah. But
yeah, all right.
I'm very lightweight, so I get sleepy and all, and like way too relaxed when I drink wine. And I still have interviews to do today, so.
Yeah. All right. So it's kava
and ava.
Nemaya vina. Right?
Oh, here you go. Someone just said ava in the chat. That's exactly what I said. Kava and ava.
Kava and Ava, right.
Speaking of her, I'm going to go get her.
Okay. Ava is going to make her appearance. For the monologue today, we are going to talk about Ukraine Unchained, because since we have last heard from Nastia, the restrictions on long-range missile use inside of Russia have been lifted, and that means that everything is different, right?
No, not really. Not at all.
I don't think so.
This is
Hello,
actually
Ava.
the interview that I'm doing today, like in a few hours. Ava, say hi. Say hi.
Hi, Ava.
You know how to do this?
But we're not cooperating, right?
Say hi.
Hi.
Well, anyway, we could do this for like 7 hours.
Yeah, we could do this, and I suspect it would have an audience. But that is not how we're going to spend the morning. Tell us about what the significance of the policy change is and is not.
I mean, it's a good question. We've been waiting for this to happen for so long, for the restrictions to be lifted, that when they finally were, it was kind of very underwhelming and kind of sad. Like, I remember when I saw that piece of news, I was like, oh my God, like, this is huge. It should be huge. It should feel like this big thing. But it didn't feel like that to me. And people are obviously happy about it, but honestly, more than happiness, I've seen, like, again, annoyance of like, why did it take 3 years to make this decision that, from just purely, like, if we take the politics out of it, from like a military point of view, it's like absurd for us to not have the ability to strike Russian bases, Russian logistics. Like, you can't really win a war like that, right? When you can't do that. And so we've been waiting for 3 years, and we've lost like tens of thousands of people. And now they finally lift this restriction, and it's like, it's so late. I feel like there's so little that we can now really do with this, considering how many missiles we've been given and how many more can be given, and the fact that Russia has moved most of their planes, if not all of their planes actually, out of the ATACMS range. So it's It's very complicated and very underwhelming and very sad that it took so long.
So have you two ever met before other than in our group text?
No.
Nastia, Alicia,
Hi.
Alicia, Nastia,
Hi.
and Ava.
And
Alicia is the world's leading expert on being embarrassed by me and on information ecology, which is a term that she didn't quite coin, but she owns as much as anybody else does. Is that unduly unfair, Alicia?
Only history will say.
All right. Alicia, what's on your mind this morning?
Waking up.
Waking up. How can I help you with that?
I'd like to just actually caveat that mornings are not my forte, so I'm coming here for you, Ben.
I'm so excited about it. Then thank you for that support.
do you explain to me what information ecology is?
Yeah, Alicia, what is information ecology?
We don't need a whole lecture.
It's a little, mornings are my forte. But essentially, it is a field that studies information ecosystems, the information environment. So where information exists, everything that surrounds it, how we actually form complex systems through us as people processing information, the tools we create, the outputs that we produce, etc. So it's just a way of trying to bring together different disciplines to make an understanding of the whole system.
And it will be of particular interest to you, Nastia, that Alicia got interested in this field because of Russian propaganda.
I knew that. It was on my mind the entire time she was speaking. I was like, what's a more interesting case study than that? I remember The Economist did this amazing piece of like something like 24 hours like within the Russian propaganda cycle or something like what like if you're like an average Russian citizen, what do you see throughout the day? And they like did all of it, like what's on TV, then what's in the newspaper, what's on like whatever Instagram. It was so cool, and it's obviously completely a different kind of world and atmosphere. Anyway, very interesting.
Well, Alicia, among other things, has one of the cooler collections of propaganda that I've ever seen. Just strewn about her house. I mean, not in a chaotic way, but there's like stuff hanging on the walls that's very cool. Yeah, for example.
Oh, that's a matryoshka. Cool.
It's from
But
Vietnam.
Vietnamese.
Oh, it's not a matryoshka. Okay.
It is.
It is. But
It is.
it's a Vietnamese matryoshka.
Okay.
It's a poster from Vietnam. I got it in Hanoi, and it has Vietnamese on the top and Russian on the bottom, and it talks about their friendship, the two countries,
Cool.
Soviet
Very
Union.
All right. So, guys, what are we talking about this morning?
Did I miss the monologue?
Well, there wasn't really a monologue. Do you want one?
Always.
What do you want a monologue about?
Have you guys read Woodward's book yet?
No. The answer to that question is almost always no.
Oh,
but
okay. Is this
no?
Is this one
No.
that I'm not plugged into the Washington like? You know,
no, the thing is about Woodward. No, Woodward's books are extremely useful, but they are generally not fun to read because they are kind of a catalog of everything he was able to collect, and they're often not very organized around anything. So I find that the best way to deal with Woodward's stuff is to read them when you have to. So his books in the first Trump administration were super useful when Susan and I were writing our book. But they're just kind of an indiscriminate catalog of information because it's basically what I got people to tell me roughly strewn in a chronological fashion. And so when you need it, you use it. And otherwise, you rely on the press to find the key facts in it and report them at the time of the production of the book.
Sorry, guys, somebody called me. I had to disappear for a sec, so I
It's okay.
missed it.
We have so I just want to point out that this is the first ever, not to mention first ever Dog Shirt TV with a sideways guest,
What's going on?
which is kind of awesome. Yeah, there we go. But it is also the first ever In Lieu of Fun / Dog Shirt TV in which all the guests or co-hosts have some significant Canadian connection.
I was going to say not American.
Well, that we've done before, but it's like a kind of Canadian takeover. I mean, Nastia's sort of honorary Canadian because she went to boarding school and university in Canada. And the two of you are like, Canadian archetypes.
Are you guys right now? Exciting.
Yeah, Alicia is, like the mountain woman of rural Ontario, and she goes out with her axe.
It's more like swamp.
And Eve is, the Bloc Québécois herself.
Oh yeah. This baby is so cute.
Yeah, she's being fussy because I think she wants to sleep, but I'm engaging with you guys, so you have to wait. Your mommy has a life.
Yeah.
So, Ev, what is on your mind this morning?
Oh, unprompted like that. What have you been talking about? So I'm not completely unrelated. Like,
oh no, we haven't been. I mean, we've been. I introduced Alicia and Nastia, who had never met, and I asked them both what was on their minds, and neither of them responded with an appropriate monologue.
And to talk about Woodward's book. But
oh yeah, well we could talk about Woodward's book. What did you think of Woodward's book?
Wait, are we cutting out Eve?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, well, I started reading it, but it's because I'm doing the podcast, so this is kind of work reading, but also I was just curious. I've never read his books. I wasn't even aware of him before this book came out, and everyone in my circle started talking about it. But I mean, as someone who's never read his stuff, it's pretty impressive because it's so much insider things. And I saw that someone in the chat said that all the best bits are publicized anyway, which is true. A lot of it is a lot of this has been in the media as the events were happening, but it's still very useful to see the timeline all in one place. So
Woodward, of course, co-authored the second best book about Watergate, which is All the President's Men, which was made into the famous movie. The best book about Watergate is Washington Journal, Washington by, I'm sorry, her name, Elizabeth Drew, which is just an astonishing piece of work. And Elizabeth is quite elderly now, and I met her a number of years ago, and I told her she had written one of the only two really perfect books about Watergate. And she asked me what the other one was, and I said, All the President's Men, and she said, oh, that's not a good book. And so, so Elizabeth disagrees with me that there are two great books. There are actually more. Stanley Cutler's Wars of Watergate is wonderful, and I hear that my friend Garrett Graff's new history of Watergate is wonderful, but I have not read it yet, and so I don't actually want to slight. What I meant when I said the only two great books, the only two contemporary great books that were kind of written in real time.
So what was really surprising for me when I was reading this is, as a Ukrainian, of course, our Ukrainian information ecosystem, we're going to be using those terms, is full of like assumptions that the Americans really have no idea what they're talking about when they're talking about Ukraine, and that no one understands the profound nature of the enmity between Ukraine and Russia. And in the book, Woodward describes in great detail how Sullivan was like reading the depths of like history, like Ukrainian and Russian history, and how both Biden and Sullivan like knew even before, like when they were just watching the troops build up in 2021, how they were talking about how Putin, like for him, this is like an existential thing, like he wants to eradicate Ukraine. So it's like all of the right things that we think no one but we do understands, actually they kind of do. And everyone was aware of this historical dynamics, so that was just like really interesting for me to read.
So did it make you I mean, there's a fashionable thing among Ukrainians to hate Jake Sullivan.
That it,
And
literally everyone, even people who can't even name what the actual title of the guy is, they will all say he's terrible.
right, there's a I mean, Jake Sullivan is sort of like the if you want if you want to not blame Biden, there's a kind of like if only the czar knew quality in which Jake Sullivan is Rasputin. Did it make you hate Jake Sullivan less?
I actually don't hate him anymore. I've never like hated him, but I did have negative feelings about the guy. But the more I learn about him from people who actually know him, the less I feel that way. So
Well, I know Jake Sullivan a little bit. I know his wife very well. She was just elected to Congress, by the way. And uh, Jake is a uh, like all human beings, a flawed human being. We are all fallen, but I do think he is. Um, uh, People do attribute the caution of Joe Biden to Jake Sullivan, and a lot of what people are anxious about and angry about at Jake really should be attributed to his boss, who's an independent mind and has agency in his own decisions. And if the Biden administration has been too cautious, and at times it certainly has been, that has to be laid at the feet of Joe Biden rather than assumed that Jake Sullivan is the sort of mastermind puppeteer. And I will be interested if Jake
I
ever
want a book. I want a memoir.
yeah, I mean, if he ever articulates what the internal conversations were, I would not be surprised if the caution is ultimately more Biden's than his.
There is something like that in the book, actually, where Woodward describes how Sullivan and Biden had this argument about how whether Biden should or should not be bluffing when he's addressing Russia before the full scale invasion, especially on the issue of whether or not the US would ever send troops to defend Ukraine. And so Biden was like, apparently, according to the book, Biden has this belief that great powers should never bluff, like they should just be honest and whatever. And Sullivan was like, "Well, you hold all the cards here. So what's wrong with like a little bit of bluffing? Like some ambiguity on this issue might actually kind of like perhaps even deter Russia because they would leave that option open." And so they had this back and forth. Supposedly, according to the book, they would have these like arguments about whether Biden should or should not do it. But Biden was like, "No, we're not doing it." And he said at the press conference that like we will never do this kind of thing. So that's just one of the
Yeah,
examples.
I mean, I think there's the story of the Biden administration's internal decision making, which is not quite a black box to us, but is a dark box, because they don't leak all that much, I think is a really interesting one, and why the caution and where it came from and what it takes to why this pattern developed in which Ukraine says give us X, and the administration says no, you don't need X, no, you don't need X, no, you don't need X. Okay, 4 months later or 8 months
Really
later.
annoying.
Yeah, how that pattern developed, and whether it's how much of it is a Defense Department caution, how much of it is an NSC caution, how much of it is a presidential caution. I think, there's a real, I really want to understand that dynamic better than I do.
About that, how do you feel about the fact that Woodward waited so long before publishing the book? Would have you been interested in knowing more about the internal process before?
So I think with this, with Woodward writing on Trump, there were some questions about whether he sat on things that were highly newsworthy and sort of published them later. I don't think that's been as much of an issue with Biden. I also think that, it's kind of unfair to a reporter to say, please scoop yourself on a regular basis. It's kind of not what people do. And so I understand the irritation at the Maggie Habermans of the world, but I don't actually share it. I think people are allowed to save things for their books. And I don't know. I like why people want to hate Maggie Haberman or Bob Woodward or, and there's this real tendency, I think, to blame people. I mean, I wrote a piece in defense of Merrick Garland the other day, and the bile that is directed his way in response to that piece is really surprising to me. And I feel a little bit the same way about the bile directed at reporters who hold things for their book. It's one thing if it's, something that's super urgent, but this is a book about, the Biden administration's Ukraine decision making. Like, why would anybody expect that Woodward would report such a book in order to scoop himself serially? So I'm not lining up with those critics. Alicia, Ev and I had a Canadian politics populism conversation the other day. And I was interested in your thoughts on the state of the I don't know what to call it in Canada. It's not the Trumpist movement. It's not the Fordist movement. It's kind of the old Reform / Tory as remodeled through truckers and Trump and Rob Ford. Like, first of all, what do we call it? And secondly, what do you make of it, and how concerned about it are you?
I need to stay hiding up in this country because yours is falling apart. I'm sure I want to go down this rabbit hole. Just
You
kidding.
can come to Ukraine. It's really nice. I've already invited all of my American colleagues. It's lovely.
How many of them have taken you up on it?
Eric is considering, actually.
Yeah.
He said he might consider it. Sorry, keep going.
I've been before the war.
No, she means to live.
Yeah, well, escape.
As a shield against the craziness.
There is no escape. Every country's falling. This is me in the morning. Welcome. It's the Conservatives. It's not a new movement. It's an old party that has had some different iterations over the past. Reform Party was a separate one that emerged and then kind of got reabsorbed. There is different factions that seem to kind of come and go. There was also the alliance movement, et cetera, but they just keep coalescing around what was a traditional kind of conservative party with changing views. I would say that established party has, or at least in the leadership of Polyev, has tried to capitalize on movements like the Freedom Rally, the truckers. And so that maybe has also led to a push towards the right or more of an acceptability on certain things. But I also think that that has to do with the whole pandemic and a bit of a trifecta for how people react to uncertain situations, and also rules. Apparently, we have a good contingent of Canadian population who didn't like to follow rules. Who knew?
And to what extent do you see the current iteration of the Conservative Party as a kind of, Canadian Trumpism? And to what extent do you see it as, just the natural evolution from where Brian Mulroney was 20 years ago? I mean, it feels really different.
I think our politics are changing in similar ways to the other countries, whether that's like France, the US. There is, I would say, almost like a conversion to entertainment. So I feel like our politics have followed different media and how that's changed from like cable TV to reality TV to being online all the time to everything becoming reduced to a tweet or some sort of short post. And
What about to impromptu YouTube Riverside live streams with people from all over the place talking without scripts?
yes, exactly. This.
That's the direction it's headed, I think.
So, I mean, I think that there's been this kind of entertainmentification of all things, and that includes politics. And I think that that has also reduced politics to, witty little sound bites. And there does seem to be some sort of shift in mores. Like there used to be a time, or at least I want to believe there was a time. Maybe there wasn't. I mean, I used to work a lot more. Well, I still do it. Look at history and things like this. And our elections used to be really violent. Like in the 1800s, you'd have to get up on, at least in Upper Canada, you'd have to get up on a podium and declare who you voted for, and you could get beat up all the way there or all the way back. So maybe we have this
We should
nostalgia.
go back to that.
Maybe we have this nostalgia.
I think people's hides should be accountable for their votes.
Well, I was going to say there used to be some sort of mores around lying, right? Like you couldn't go and say an outright lie that, say, chaplains can't participate in Remembrance Day ceremonies and get away with it. Where I feel like something has shifted in international politics in which not being entirely truthful, being misleading, or lying outright has become acceptable with no consequence. I don't know where you go from there.
Yeah, it's a tricky business because once you completely normalize lying, it's very hard to know what the outside limit is, right? What the thing you're not allowed to do looks like. And I think we are both domestically but internationally groping for that a little bit, right? So if you're allowed to say they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats in Springfield, what aren't you allowed to say? And it does seem like, oddly, it seems to be that you do pay a price for saying that unlawful, undocumented aliens in prison should get trans health care, right? That you're clearly not allowed to say. But it's not clear to me what the rules are in terms of what you pay a political price for and what you don't. And it also is pretty clear to me that some people pay a political price for things that others don't. So, for example, if you're Trump and you tell a bald-faced lie, then it's Tuesday. But if you're if you're Kamala Harris and you tell a bald-faced lie, you're going to pay a political price for that. And the question of how we decide what the things that limit what who can say are in this political environment, it's actually very puzzling how it works. Like, why is it that um you know JD Vance who's a bright guy, went to Yale Law School, and um you know
Since when is that
it,
a like a sign of
it's a it's
anyone's,
a
like, I've kind of given up on that, like if you're
it's a
educated.
traditional marker of, I mean, look, he's a published author. He's not, whatever you say about JD Vance, he's not dumb.
Yeah, that's true.
Um
Sure.
and yet there seems to be no rule that says, okay, he can go here but not here. And I think that's a weird thing. And why that rule applies to him but not to uh you know Ron DeSantis, who can't say certain things without the bottom falling out of his support, as he learned when he tried to run for president. um is endlessly puzzling to me, like why certain people are exempt from the normal rules of politics, and what that actually means about the reality of those rules.
Well, I mean, hypothesis here is I think that it has more to do with the followers that those people have and what they've determined or accepted as their reality and where their limits are. And DeSantis is the weird outlier on that one, but correct me, I mean, probably not got this right, because keeping all of the American politics in my head can sometimes be hard, and Canadian and everything else. Did he not try to go against Trump? Was he not competing
He
with him?
did. Well, they ran against each other, and he was believed to be a very strong contender, and then people started voting. And he, faded like, I don't know, dust in a gale. But I I mean, there is definitely in the Republican Party the going up against Trump rule, which is that nobody survives it. If you're a Democrat and you go up against Trump, you can make a career on it. See Adam Schiff, see, um, Joe Biden, right? But if you're a Republican and you go up against Trump, that does seem to be a rule that's pretty inviolate, at least so far. Nobody has survived as a viable politician having done that. But I am more interested in the question of why certain people can just bald-facedly lie and certain people can't. I don't like, there doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to that.
Because I think the problem here is that literally there are two realities. There's two versions of reality that have cleaved, and the one in which you sit and the one in which finding lying intolerable sits can't possibly fathom the other one anymore. They don't actually share common ground.
Okay, so I buy that, but let's stipulate for a minute that Matt Gaetz, who is in the second reality, he's got a problem. I don't know if it's an insurmountable problem with becoming attorney general, but he's not, there's a discussion going on about whether 4 Republicans will vote against him. There's no, he hasn't done anything that Trump hasn't done. I mean, Matt Gaetz is accused of having had sex with a 17-year-old. Trump has boasted about, going into the the Miss World competition dressing room while people are undressed. And these are very young people as well. So I'm just not certain I understand, like, I'm not defending Matt Gaetz or anything, but why is it that any Republican who would have voted for Trump would be, would have a hesitation about Matt Gaetz?
Are they
And that's just within the ecosystem of, or Pete Hegseth, the guy is accused of a perfectly routine sexual assault. Now I don't want to defend the perfectly routine sexual assault, but it's like Trump is accused of 20 of those, literally. And one of them has been adjudicated. So, like, why would any Republican senator who voted for Donald Trump say, no, no, but I'm drawing the line at the guy with the tattoos?
This is such a sensitive subject in the sense that, like, the abuse against women has never really been addressed. I mean, it is so hard to go up against those kinds of accusations. We had this one brief moment of Me Too, and look at the backlash from that right now, and what is the rhetoric among people who support Donald Trump, etc. So I think perhaps you might be underestimating how little a large population of Americans and others care about the treatment of women, especially in those contexts, and may believe that there is an acceptability in doing things like that to women.
So I am totally down for that possibility, but I don't understand why Matt Gaetz or Pete Hegseth has a problem. Um,
Because now this is where I'm going to posit
which
this.
of course query whether they do, which may be the answer to this
And
question.
who is saying they have a problem? Because this is the other thing, like just watching this last election, how acutely aware I'm feeling about the information sources that I am normally exposed to and the friends that I have. Perhaps we all were in an echo chamber that was incapable of seeing what was coming. And so there's this part of me now that is just kind of lost at sea because I can't really divine what's happening in a reality that I'm not a part of. And the one that I may be more of a part of is also incapable of seeing that. And we may just be reflecting back the things that we think are proper, the mores we've accepted, which will have no bearing on this current administration and how things go through.
Richard Wattenbarger. We have so much on the table. We have attackums. We have attacks on women by politicians. We have Canadian politics. We have why rules apply to some people and not others. And we have Eve Gamon sitting there ready to tackle all AI questions. So, what's on your mind?
Wow, so much on my mind, but I have um, since I am about as much of a morning person as Alicia and am probably similarly addled at this point in the morning, I will have I will direct my question to her, but anyone can answer it. I guess um, I, what I'm wondering is if you have an explanation or a theory why uh, people will demand truth in their in their private dealings, um, and they will abandon that when it comes to dealing with public figures, when it comes to assessing politicians. So good example is you when you're buying a used car, you will approach the car salesman with some degree of skepticism and caution because you know there's a high probability or not insignificant probability that they're trying to pull a fast one on you. But people won't do that with uh, a lot of politicians.
Isn't it just because it's politics and people like don't really believe that politics can be good or just or There's a lot of cynicism. Like that's why people are like, well, he's just campaigning. Well, none of it matters. What matters is what he's gonna do, like policy wise. What he says doesn't matter. That's my
Yeah,
I
I guess what's puzzling to me is just the whole public-private split and how the behavior just changes so dramatically between those. So we will evaluate people in our private dealings by criteria that we are happy to suspend when we're evaluating them publicly.
I would like to side with NASA. I actually think that it's pretty similar. Like,
Mhm.
we approach politicians the exact same way we approach the car dealer. And just like, oh, of course they're lying. That's it. Like, we're just like
everyone lies.
assuming
Yeah.
that that is the case. So why
Mhm.
fuss about it? It's just like the reality.
I think truth is a really slippery kind of concept that's formulated in many ways. And so when you're going to buy something and you expect it to work a certain way, that is perhaps a more direct and obvious kind of truth formulation, that the car should work, it should function to a certain degree. This is how much I'm spending on it, and this is what you told me. And that feels a little bit more black and white than a lot of the other ways in which truth can get created. So, for example, you might have truth based on social preferences. So, you could be part of a big group who all agree that lying is bad, assaulting women is bad, but you may be in another one where it's like, actually, the government can't be trusted. I don't really know what's going on. This guy feels like me. He's representing an image of an American that I think is what an American should be. Women, somebody lied about me. Like, you could be part of a different world in which those social mores affect how you develop truth, right? And some of it can just be on pure preference, and some of it can be based on faulty information going in. So what I worry about when it's like, so something very direct like a car buying versus government, is that most people don't have experience with government at many different levels of government. They don't understand how it works. The more complicated the world works, it becomes, the less likely they are to understand the intricacies of it, the easier it is for them to make up explanations, be fed different explanations, and that becomes their truth. So I think part of the problem is that it's not black and white. Some people have accepted what people like Trump say, and that becomes their reality, it becomes their truth, and therefore they don't think that there's a disconnect here. Humans are weird in how they process information, I think.
I also think there's an important difference between the level of truth that we expect from a car dealer and where the level of truth that we expect from a politician. So, and I think Trump is a particularly interesting figure in this conversation, because if you ask, is he being factually truthful? The answer is he lies at a level that very few politicians have ever lied, right? I think the Washington Post documented 30,000 untrue statements during his first term, right? If you ask whether he is authentic, whether he is really being himself, which is, I think, what a lot of people mean when they say true. They don't actually mean factual truth. They mean, is he like really who is he being, is he representing what he really believes, what he's is he being emotionally truthful? The answer is he is actually one of the most honest politicians I've ever run across, in the sense that he actually is incapable, in a way that's totally dangerous. He's incapable of hiding, including from Vladimir Putin, how he feels about anything, right? He is completely emotionally transparent. If you praise him, he's delighted, right? Like, he has no poker face about anything. And people see that as honesty. Whereas somebody like Kamala Harris, who is, I mean, she's as apt to shade the truth as the next politician, I suppose. But she's, I certainly don't know her as a, I don't know her at all, but I don't know her to be a dishonest person in the sense of making up facts or, lying about people the way Trump does. But she has this mask, and, the mask is a persona who is not who she is. You suspect and you hear that she's, very different in private, right? I don't believe for a second that Trump is different in private. Right, he like there's a real WYSIWYG quality to Donald Trump, and I think people deeply confuse that with honesty and truth.
I think there's something to be said in that for sure.
By the way, I will also say that a paranoid schizophrenic is completely authentic, right? In the sense that, not different in public than private, right? This is not to say that, where you can be one way to be entirely authentic is to be nuts. And to be incapable of showing different sides to different people, which we actually do on a regular basis. That's part of being human. But I think people really confuse that emotional honesty with actual honesty, and they're different.
I also think it's not necessarily a matter of truth here. It's a matter of a rejection of something. And there is currently a strand of rejecting what is perceived to be establishment, even if that isn't like based again in reality. There is this like get rid of the kind of corporate speak, the people who are polished, the people who went to Ivy League schools, and it's like the people who are behaving badly maybe are coming across as more human, which is sad.
Right, which people use the word authentic to describe that, right? People use, but I think there is a component of that that's about honesty and truth, which is people want to know who you are. And when you present with a mask, which is, the public face, people say you're not being honest about who you are. You're putting on the human resources face. You're hiding your real opinions. You really don't believe that. But when you actually just come out and, lay your racism on the table, lay your, you deny that you said what you said in the Access Hollywood tape, but everybody knows, right? There's something like people confuse that authenticity, like he really is the bore and the asshole that he that we suspect that all politicians are behind. He's just honest about it. People confuse that with truth and honesty, but I agree with you. It's not. Truth is the wrong concept for it. I have a question. To go back, Alicia, to the Canadian question, is there, obviously Doug Ford or Rob Ford pioneered this he's even kind of a proto-Trump in this regard. But is this a feature of the Poilievre world too, or is this a kind of uniquely Trump thing?
I feel like there was this is me not pulling things up in the morning, but I'm pretty sure we had a politician in the past who said something about Canadians don't want other people in their bedroom. So the sex part is not really a facet of our politics. It's not as talked about, except for one sad cabinet minister who took a red briefcase home and shouldn't have, and was dating a woman from the connected to the mob. As that aside, we don't really have as much of that kind of discourse about like sexual harassment and stuff. It doesn't seem to be as prevalent. That said,
the discourse or the reality.
I don't know. I mean, we've certainly had a lot of challenges within institutions like our military, but it hasn't been as pronounced in our politics yet. So that part aside, that's a little bit different. We don't really have that going on as much, knock on wood. Hopefully it's not happening, but it's not being talked about either. But in the kind of style of politics and rhetoric, there definitely has been an uptake, particularly in conservative circles, that would be, I would say, leaning more populist, and very much more constant campaigning. I think this is another thing that has changed, where politicians seem to be forever campaigning. It doesn't matter when the next election is coming. They're always on an attack. There is no kind of common ground in the House of Commons. There's not a lot of trying to find compromise to make things move forward. It does feel like it's always about attack, get power, hold power, etc.
Joel, it's good to see your face.
It's good to see you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So I'm going to throw just a little bit of a curveball at this. I've been reading a lot of Anne Applebaum lately and been listening to her podcast, and she talks a lot about authoritarian systems. And one of the things, and they were talking about, like, someone was asking the question of, do all the people around Putin really believe what he's saying? And they were saying, you're asking the wrong question. In authoritarian systems, it does not matter. It makes its own reality, and you have to play within those rules, or else you end up in the gulag. So it's possible part of the disconnect and the dissonance here may be that we think we're playing baseball, and they think they're playing hockey. They're playing by an entirely different set of rules that are surrounded around authoritarian systems, and we still think we're playing in an egalitarian system. And that's part of why it just does not add up. So that's kind of just throwing you a little curveball. Great to see everybody. Good morning. Thank you. I'll just kind of head on out.
Great issue to raise, Joel. I will say one thing about it, and then Ev and Alicia add whatever thoughts you may have. So my problem with this is that it explains internal Mar-a-Lago behavior. It explains Republican Party elite behavior. It does not explain voter behavior. So, we don't live in a system in which if you vote for this shit, if you don't vote for this shit, you get sent to the gulag. We do live in a system in which your vote is actually secret. So if you don't find this attractive, there is a real remedy available to you as a voter. Now, if you're Kellyanne Conway, that's different, because then your career is on the line, and by the way, you're PNG in a lot of other circles, and so if you get cast out of MAGA, you're in a very lonely place. But if you're, say, Joel Woodward, and you don't like it, you just vote a different way. And you have party primaries where you're entitled to do that, and you have general elections where you're entitled to do that. And so the authoritarian nature of the clique, which is real, to me explains the internal dynamics of the clique, but it doesn't explain why the clique is attractive to large numbers of people. I think for that, you have to turn to some of the issues that Alicia writes about, that you have to turn to some of the questions of the information dynamics, some of the questions of that are ideological in character. I don't think it can explain voting behavior yet. Obviously, as the political ecosystem becomes more authoritarian, if it does, then of course you have that question of the extension of the logic of the clique to the logic of the country, but that has not happened yet. So, Ev, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, sure, as a voter, you won't be like treated as an outcast if you don't vote for Trump. But if you already feel like an outcast and you see a Trump where you can aspire to power, like you can aspire to a better world. I think there's something like this too, like the authoritarianism as a attractive component too, like a maybe I can raise up to power, or like not to power necessarily, but raise to these people are like or more like me. They look like what I am in a way more than the elites. So I can, yeah.
So but again, but that's about the attraction of it, not about the coercion of it, right?
Yeah. Well, you can see it as like the current system is treating me as an outcast. So I'm choosing the other one because the one I'm currently living in is putting me on the sidelines.
Alicia, what do you think? How much can you explain the attraction in terms of the coercive, authoritarian nature of the community?
I think I think you slide into authoritarianism. So right now it is a move towards it as opposed to being in it. Yes, as you have a personality that is dictating how things should be and offering no other way except abject loyalty and doing whatever they're saying, the elite that are surrounding him will go this way. Will they believe it all? Probably not. I mean, I think you usually have about three types of categories of people who are in that kind of circle. You do have ideologues and proselytizers who may believe what they're doing. You're going to have people who are seeking profit in doing this and will support whatever the regime is and how it's going. And you will also have people who are seeking power. And these last two groups may not necessarily believe what they're doing, but they're getting some sort of benefit from it and they move that way. When it comes to the people, I agree with you, Ben. I think that they don't just necessarily automatically accept it. They may be buying into some vision that's being left, but I do think the surrounding conditions that are impacting an information ecosystem also drive people to believe certain things. So I've been hearing that there were some surveys coming out of young people in like France and Spain who would be more accepting of an authoritarian government so long as their housing and other needs are met. So right now we have housing crisis in places like Canada. We have a food crisis. There's a rush on food banks. People can't afford it. And I think that becomes a scenario in which people become more accepting of an authoritarian type of government or leader because they promise that they're going to solve their problems. So again, it's a complex thing. You have multiple layers. You have multiple different types of actors engaging in things, and you have many different things that are affecting how people perceive things and how they're going to react.
Well, on that cheerful note, I promise you that I alone can fix all your problems, whatever they are. You need a house, I'll get you a house. You need food, I'll plant some tomatoes for you. I can, whatever your problems are, I can fix it, but you need to submit to me and my authority. That's the deal. And it's going to be a benign paternalistic dictatorship, emphasis on dictatorship, not on benign. We're going to leave it there because it's 8:59 and we end on time. Notice that Alicia went from today from I'm still waking up, I'm not a morning person, to a disquisition on the nature of obedience in the space of an hour. That's the effect we try to have. We will be back tomorrow. Whenever Alicia's here, we will talk about information inputs to the information animal, which is all of us. Whenever Ev is here, we will talk about, I don't know, Ev talks about all kinds of things and sometimes just asks questions, which is very cool. If Nastia shows up, we may talk about Ukraine. again, or Ava. And of course, if Scott Shapiro shows up, we will figure out whether he's decided whom to vote for in the next election, and always a possibility of Kate Klonick showing up as well. Remember, 8 o'clock tomorrow, we have a show, and keep the faith, and be great Americans and Canadians and Ukrainians, and we will see you tomorrow.